If you've just finished competing in your pageant and you're one of the many who didn't manage to win this time, and that could be anything from not placing to coming first runner up, you may already be thinking of or planning or scheming, as one of my friends said, your return. And maybe that's as soon as next year, same pageant, you've picked your system, you know you're going to be competing. And so maybe you give yourself a week, a month, a few months, whatever it is, but you're set on returning. And I'm going to assume, obviously, you want to do better. Now, I want to give you a crazy idea. If you really want to level up your pageant performance next time or for next year. And I've mentioned it briefly before, and I don't think it's going to come as a huge surprise if you've followed me for any amount of time. But the crazy idea is to not do the typical pageant prep. What do I mean by typical pageant prep? Well, it's sort of, if you remember the very first time you did a pageant, and let's say the very first time you decided to do it with coaching, not let's say the first time you decided to do it and you did everything yourself. But the first time you do it with coaching, what happens? You might look a coach up, you might get a recommendation. I know some of my clients have found me through one of the hundreds of title holder interviews that I've done. And very quickly, I feel that you're sucked into the pageant ecosystem. You get familiar with the lingo. You also, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't mean that getting sucked into the pageant ecosystem is a bad thing. I mean, you do want to know about what's involved in the industry and some of the verbiage that's used. But where it is potentially bad is where you begin to adopt some of the, let's say, limiting beliefs that I think a lot of people in pageants have, a lot of people in the industry have. And I would almost argue that the longer they've been in the industry, the more likely they are to have those limiting beliefs. Because I really believe they're almost like, this sounds terrible, but it's almost like a virus, or if you remember back to the COVID days, and if you're just around it enough, eventually you're going to get it. Now, I think many of you will know this. If even after the pandemic itself was over, many of you got COVID afterwards. And fortunately, after the pandemic, it wasn't as serious, but you still managed to get it. And it's very rare that any of us managed to completely avoid it. But when I say limiting beliefs, let me ask you this. If you decide that you want to work on interview, what is a typical pageant wisdom in terms of preparing yourself to give your best interview? Well, it would be to take on an interview coach. If you wanted to improve your runway performance, what would the typical wisdom be? Well, you take on a walking coach or a runway coach. If you wanted to improve your sense of fashion or style or your wardrobe, maybe you take on a stylist. But there seems to be this idea in pageantry that you need to use people who have pageant-specific knowledge. Or said differently, there seems to be a fear that you can't possibly reach outside the pageant industry because they won't know anything about pageants. Now, to be fair, that's true to an extent. I think if you were to take on, let's say, a sports psychologist for your mindset, and they didn't know anything about pageants, it might take some time to bring them up to speed for sure. On the other hand, there isn't really any such thing as a pageant sports psychologist. I've been dubbed the pageant shrink. I don't have an official psychology degree or psychiatry degree. I do have a life coaching degree, but that's not the same thing. And I do a lot of work in mindset. But there is no reason, particularly if you've competed recently, let's say this year, and you want to not just incrementally improve next year, but you are determined to win. And you don't want to leave it up to chance. And you know that the way to do that is to stand out head and shoulders above everyone else. If that's the game plan, and I think that makes a good deal of sense in something that's as subjective as pageantry, my question then would be, why would you follow the preparation path that all your fellow competitors are going to take? Why would you go to the same coaches? Why would you get the same advice? That advice that's sort of been passed around along with those limiting beliefs for the past 5 years, 10 years, 20 years in pageantry. Put it this way. Think about how much the world has changed. Think specifically about how much pageantry has changed, the pageant industry has changed. Most people would say, it's changed a lot. Okay, how much has a coaching advice changed? Now, I understand that not all of it should change because sometimes good advice is good advice. But if the coaching advice is exactly the same as it was even 5 years ago, I mean, I'm looking at the calendar because I can't remember the year, but 5 years ago we were in the middle of 2021, we were in the middle of the pandemic. 10 years ago, no one had ever heard of COVID. 20 years ago, I don't even know if Instagram was a thing. And certainly ChatGPT wasn't. And so to think that you'd be getting the same advice from maybe 5, 10, or even 20 years ago, and then you're telling me you want to win, that to me doesn't make any sense. Now, I know some of you would have followed the World Cup recently. I know an interesting number of you are interested in racing and things like Formula One. You have to know that if you're looking at something like Formula One, the technology and the rules are updated, I think, almost every year. Things get better and better and better, and the coaching that has to keep up with it. It's the same in tennis, if you don't know. I was a tennis coach, and one of the interesting things to me was how much coaching lagged behind what was actually working for the best tennis players in the world. So, for example, if you don't know, the common wisdom used to be in tennis that you would hit your backhand, which is sort of, if I'm right hand dominant, the shot on my right side is called my forehand, the shot on the other side is called my backhand, and frankly, it's a shot that a lot of people struggle with, especially because the wisdom used to be you'd had to hit it with one hand. So if you imagine that you're a baseball player, right, or a softball player, and you're right-handed, you normally would hit the ball on your right side. Well, imagine that you had to hit it on your left side, but not only did you have to hit it on your left side, you had to do it with only one hand. Many of us would find that very, very difficult. There came a time when people started to use two hands on the backhand, which made it a lot easier. You have two hands on the racket, it's a lot easier to get some muscle on it, especially when you're a beginner, especially when you're tiny. Now, did the tennis coaches of the time look at that and go, wow, that's interesting? These people are getting results that are different than anything else before. I'm going to look at this and I'm going to teach it? No. You think they would. Instead, what they insisted on was that it was a bad idea. It was a fundamentally flawed stroke, and anyone who made it work, they were the exception rather than the rule. Now, bear in mind, people using two-handed backhands were winning the biggest tournaments in the world. Well, after a period of, let's say, a couple of years, I don't know exactly how long, but a while, it became pretty undeniable that the two-handed backhand had some major advantages. Not that it was better, but it certainly was easier. And if you want to get into something like a sport and you want to be competitive, if you can make it a bit easier on yourself, that's a massive advantage. And so the coaching expertise, these world-class coaches, the knowledge they were passing around has always lagged behind what's actually working. Now, I will draw a parallel between something like that and the pageant industry. It's not quite the same. You don't have modern racket technology or cutting-edge carbon fiber spoiler technology, right? Or carbon fiber weaves in your heels. Maybe you do one day. Who knows? But the industry so has changed because the world has changed, and pageantry is a reflection of the world. So, for example, social media, artificial intelligence, online presence, so many of these things simply either didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago, or if they did, they were a much smaller part of pageantry. Now, I would say there's a good argument to be made that you can't really be a competitive pageant contestant if you don't have a social media presence. I mean, it's expected that you at least have an Instagram account. If you don't, I don't know how much further you can go. But the point is, if pageantry has changed, if it's evolved, and if pageantry is a microcosm of the world, and the world has evolved as much as it has, and then you want to really rocket your improvement for next year so that you can win, not incrementally. Oh, I've worked on my walk for 9 months. I've not eaten an ice cream for 9 months, and so I've got a 7-pack now rather than a 6-pack, and I think my hair flick has changed a little. No, like, you guys, if you really want to set yourself apart from your competition, you need to do something different. You need to think different. Now, I don't mean you just go off the reserve and just come up with something random. I'm not saying that. This is a very well-known concept in philosophy, in business, is that you look at seemingly unrelated fields and you bring in the expertise, the wisdom, the knowledge, the success from those fields, and you look at how you can apply it to yourself as a pageant contestant. Now, let me give you a specific example. So, interview. I'll go with interview because I think that's the area that I know best outside of mindset. I've done a few interviews recently. One of the ones that really stood out to me was with Caitlin Humphrey. Now, she went on to win Miss Arizona USA. So I'll be seeing her in Miami in 29 or 28 days or something like that. She was a great interview. She was thoughtful, but she was also funny. She wasn't too serious. She had a really great, vivacious energy about her. That's the sort of thing that you want to bring into interview. Now, here's the thing. Do I think that Caitlin learned all of that from doing pageant interview coaching? I don't even know if she did coaching, and I'm sure she would tell you that if she did coaching, that hopefully it helped. But she was she just moved back from Tennessee. She was on TV on one of their big, I think it was one of their big morning shows, and she was one of their presenters, I think it was. And so she spent a lot of time in front of the camera on one of the most popular shows in Tennessee. Now, if you do something like that, something that is related to the skill that you want to improve on, let's say interview. It's not exactly pageant interview, is it? But it's like it. It's adjacent to it. And if anything, you're practicing it at a higher level. Because to get onto something like a TV show, it's not the same as doing an Instagram live series, because anyone can do that. You might do that. You might do 10 or 20 episodes. Doesn't mean anybody watched. And then you have to think, well, if nobody watched, how am I going to know if I'm any good? Because you can do something 10 or 20 times and not improve if you've done it, let's say, the wrong way. And so if you've done, let's say, 10 or 20 Instagram lives and your mannerisms have not been on point and you've got a very monotone voice and people tuned in for 5 seconds, took one look at you and went, oh, this is boring, I'm gone. I'm not saying that you're boring, but your presentation might have needed work. You may not have improved at all. But if you get onto national TV or, Tennessee TV or big state show, you got hired because you must be pretty good. If people are paying you money to do it, you must be pretty good. And so someone like Caitlin would have to work incredibly hard to be bad at interview. Of course she could stumble. And I would guess that maybe one of the things she struggled with, if anything, would be making her answers fit within shorter timeframes. But we all struggle with that, right? Because it's not normal to try and sell yourself in 2.5 or 3 minutes. But it was undeniable to me that she has a really good camera presence and would have, by extension, a really good in-person presence, because my interviews, if you don't know, they go for about an hour. And so you can't fake with sound bites a good personal presence for an hour. You can fake it for 2 or 3 minutes, but you can't be continually interesting for an hour. And by the way, the reason I reached out to Caitlin in the first place to do an interview, because it was before she was Miss Arizona USA, was because I saw one of her reels and she was speaking pretty much straight to camera. And it was a piece about how she had to retune her mindset to not view leaving her TV job in Tennessee and moving back to Arizona as a failure. And so that really caught my interest, because not only did she have a really good camera presence, she was very good at giving words, putting her thoughts into words, doing it well, and actually showing that she had a thought process going on. Now, am I saying that you need to get on a TV show to get good at interview? Yeah. No. But think about it this way. If you started a podcast, right, and as I said, you have some metrics as to how you're going to know whether you're doing it well or not. Because a lot of people start podcasts and they do it badly. It's dull. It's boring. And so that's not going to help. But if you do it, let's say, the right way, where you're looking at your metrics, you're growing your audience, and growing your audience is a sign that you're doing something right, in balance overall, let's say. If you do one podcast episode per week in between now and your next pageant, on top of your interview coaching, if you want to do that, you can't help but improve. And you're going to learn things that you wouldn't learn in a pageant interview coaching session. That's also, by the way, if you do watch it back. You watch it back, you listen to yourself back, and that's something that I've done many, many times, because I have to even in this day and age, I still need to download and then re-upload some of my own interviews. But back in the day when I started, I had to actually edit my own interviews and put them together. So I had no choice. I had to watch and I had to listen to myself talking with my interviewee, and I learned a lot about my mannerisms and things like that. Now, if you don't want to start a podcast, even doing something like a straight to camera reel, like Caitlin did, where you're talking, you're not dancing to music, you're not pointing to words above you, you're not just overlaying text while you drink your coffee or something like that, but you actually talk. That will help you improve if you do more of that. And so many of you are afraid to do that because you think, oh my God, I hate the sound of my voice, or what am I going to say? That fear should be the sign that you need to do more of it. And by the way, I don't think you should try and address that fear by doing coaching, because you still never address the fear directly. You're afraid of going, let's say, live. That's another big one. That's like doing a straight to camera but on steroids, because you have the potential that people are going to tune in. Well, the potential that no one listens, which is one kind of embarrassing, or that people do tune in and then they start saying how horrible you are and how ugly you look and all that. And that's another kind of distraction that you need to deal with. But when you go live and you feel that fear, you don't feel that when you go to do your pageant interview coaching, do you? And so you've not learned how to deal with that heart in throat or heart in mouth sensation, which is a whole game. Because that's the mindset, that's the psychology, that's what you need to learn to deal with. Most of you know how to interview pretty well when there's no pressure, right? We can all come up with perfect answers in our head after the fact, after watching someone else bomb an on-stage question, right? What you need to learn to deal, but that's not the game. What you need to learn to deal with is how to do it under pressure, under those sorts of situations. So doing something like doing a podcast, or trying to get on a radio show or a TV show, or doing a live, doing more straight to cameras, that I strongly encourage you to look at as a way to level up your interview. Now, it's not just with interview though. So let's take some of the other areas. One of the big areas is runway, your runway presence. Now, if you're modeling, you have a strong advantage, because you've done a lot of time, I would imagine, on the runway. I would also say if you've done dancing, ballet, you have an innate advantage, because you know you're more body aware. You have more awareness as to how to turn, how to make it look graceful, etc. That being said, if you're like me and you have 2 left feet, I mean, I'm fairly coordinated, but I'm by no means a dancer. If you just do pageant runway coaching, I think you end up fairly stunted because you can't rely on doing 1 or 2 or 3 lessons a month or in between now and next year when you compete and you want to win. What, you're going to practice it only 3 times? No. So my immediate thought goes to, well, how can I practice this on a weekly basis, maybe even a daily basis, like really intense back to back? I'm practicing this 8 hours a day because then you can't help but get better. How can I throw myself in an environment where I'm around other people who really know how to walk? So even if I'm not walking, I can watch them and study them and learn from them. Well, easiest answer to that is work on becoming a model. Even if it's not your professional ambition, freelance. See if you can get to some of... Now, I'm not a huge fan of buying your way into a runway show, although that's a fair place to start. But what I mean is I'm not a fan of that as a measure of how you're improving. Because like I said, with getting on TV, if people are going to pay you to be on TV, you must be pretty good. If you're paying to get on a runway, you don't know that you're any good. Of course you're on the runway because you paid to be there. It's the same when you're asked to walk as a model because you happen to know the designer. You may be good, you may not be, I don't know. But they're asking you because it's a personal connection. But if you can get booked for professional work, even if it's an exchange, let's say you don't get paid, but maybe you get some sort of in-kind payment. But if they're choosing you to walk or to model over anyone else, at the very least, you know that you must have some sort of skill set or some sort of presence that they want to leverage off of. And then as you do that, as you get around other people who know the craft, you have no choice but to improve, and you will pick up so much more than just doing coaching sessions. Think of it this way. If you want to learn a language and you want to become fluent, how do you do it? Do you take classes? No. You go and live in the country, don't you? If you go and live in the country for 6 months, 12 months, and you don't speak a word of that language, in 6 or 12 months, I guarantee you would have got so much further than if you'd taken 6 or 12 months worth of classes. And so it's the same with your pageants, your pageant approach. But I would say you need to think outside the box because you don't really have a chance to live in a pageant country for 6 to 12 months and just somehow absorb all the skills. As I'm saying this, I'm sure some of you might think, oh, that's a great idea. I can live in... No, it doesn't exist, right? But if it's runway, look at modeling. Maybe look at dancing. If it's interview, as I said, doing podcasts, starting a live series, but with some feedback so you know whether you're getting better. The other one that you can do is acting classes. For those of you who have very monotone voices or have very monotone faces, or you're not very good at controlling your expression, maybe you're too all over the place, taking acting lessons and doing plays, acting, getting on shows, not just doing the classes. Because again, that you don't know if you're improving if you're not in front of people showing your skills and saying, hey, have I gotten any better? So don't just do the classes. Do a play. Even if it's a play no one else sees and you're just doing it with your fellow students, do a play. Try doing some short films, some short movies. There are a lot of opportunities like that now because Hollywood is not once what it was. The whole movie industry has been fractured and is changing, and there's a lot more small producers. But acting classes, singing classes, public speaking classes, all of these help with interview. For runway, as I said, you got modeling, you've got dancing, you've got anything like that. And then if there's anything else, with fashion, modeling, sure, again. Maybe you go around, I think that's a bit different because that's something that you just pick. Yes, there's a skill to picking something that works with you, but it's not the same as a practiced skill that you need to demonstrate on stage under pressure. It's just something where you get to drop your credit card or your parents' credit card and then you pick up a fancy dress, right? But for most of you, runway and interview are going to be two things that you want to get really, really good at. And what I'm going to suggest to you is Not that you need to stop doing the traditional coaching or that you need to replace it with some of these ideas, but I think you will be surprised by how much further you get and the different types of lesson you learn from doing some of these sort of related slash crazy ideas, but they're so crazy that they might just work. Because the saying goes, if you do what everyone else does, you're going to get the same results everyone else gets. And unfortunately, or maybe it's not, maybe it's just the way it is in life. In pageantry, only one girl, one woman walks away as the winner. And you and I both know to win, you need to stand out. And to stand out, you need to be doing something different. And so what I really want you to think about is, well, what are you doing that's different in your prep? Are you a news anchor? Are you a concert violinist? Are you a professional athlete? And even start with those things. Are you the president of your sorority? A lot of these tangents to pageantry, you might think, well, that doesn't relate to my pageant journey at all. I would argue that there's almost anything that you're good at, you could take some of those lessons and apply it to your pageant journey. Even something, let's say if you're an accountant and you're really good with numbers, maybe that could be the beginnings of an advocacy or a platform, or maybe you're really good at time management and that can be worked into your plan. But don't just think, oh, I just need to do more pageant interview coaching. And the only way I'm going to practice is I'm just going to go to my coach. And even if you go once a week, I really don't like the idea of that, guys. And I say that as a coach. The people who improve the most are the ones that get to practice the most. And the people who go to coaching every week, they tend to substitute that for practice. When I ask them, how have you practiced? They say, well, I come to you once a week. And I'm like, that's the only time you practice? That's not enough. And I don't mean, by the way, that I want you to come see me more than once a week. I don't want you to have to come keep seeing me everywhere. I don't want you to become dependent on me. I want you to develop some routine, methodology, or practice outside of me. And then you should only be using your coach to get feedback as to, have I improved? What do I need to keep working on? Don't use coaches as an excuse to not practice. Don't use them as a crutch to not practice, or, as I said, to not face your fear. Okay, so if you know getting on stage, doing that on-stage question, that gives you fear. Going interview room gives you fear. You're not going to combat that by going to a coach. You're going to combat that by tackling the fear head on. So do a live, do a stand-up, that's a great one. Try doing stand-up or improvisational comedy. That'll really throw you for a loop. But you get so good at juking and jiving verbally that interview will be so easy to you, and you'll enjoy it, and you'll probably be really good at getting a laugh. So does this make sense? It's so much more powerful than just, oh, I'm going to do interview coaching, even if the coach is a great one. And that's not a given. Because I hate to say it, but many coaches, and coaches don't like me saying this, but it's the truth. Many pageant coaches are only pageant coaching because they feel it's the only thing that they can do, or they feel they want to make some money off pageantry and they go, well, I'll be a coach. It was the same with tennis, by the way. Most tennis coaches weren't very good at tennis coaching because they were failed, in inverted commas, they were failed players. If you're winning, you don't coach because you get paid more to win. Most of the people who came to tennis coaching were pros, like tennis professionals that never really made it. And at some point they gave up on their dream, or they were forced to give up on their dream, and they became a coach. Now, some of them became really good coaches, but those were the ones who worked on the craft of coaching. And there aren't many of those in any coaching field, including pageantry. So develop your own way of practicing. Bring in, as I said, some thoughts from outside of pageantry, and you might be very pleasantly surprised by not only how quickly you improve, but by how much you improve and how much the lessons you learn by doing so, by reaching outside of pageantry, how much these are ideas that you've never heard anyone else say. because you will have a unique experience. If you try and bring in, let's say, being a stand-up comic into the world of pageantry, because now you're combining those two experiences and you have a unique overlap. Let's say you're doing pageants, you do some stand-up comedy, and you take some salsa lessons. On top of that, you get working as a model, a freelance model. Now you have an overlap of 3 or 4 unique experiences, and your knowledge will be genuinely unique. Not just something where you say, well, I'm unique because there's no one like me. And I'll say, yes, you're unique like everyone else. Here's a cookie, right? But you'll genuinely be unique because you'll have this overlap. We've talked about this before, so I won't repeat it here. But that's how you're going to stand out. That's how you're going to win. If you're at a very basic level, of course, you do some basic coaching to get caught up with the fundamentals. But I don't think most of you are basic. I think most of you, you're already at a high competitive level in pageantry and you're looking for the edge. And I'm here to tell you, you won't find the edge doing what everyone else does. You need to try something different. So do it.